The air was cool in Paris that morning, grey skies hanging low over Charles de Gaulle like tired curtains. Inside Terminal 2E, Gate 37 buzzed quietly with the usual business of departure. Men in suits. Women with click-clack heels. Flight announcements cutting through with sterile precision. And seated near the farthest row of chairs, legs crossed, hoodie zipped halfway, was a man no one truly noticed. No entourage. No designer luggage. Just a calm face beneath a plain cap, scrolling silently on a weathered phone. That man was Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. He could have taken the state jet. He could have summoned security. But that wasn't how he moved. He believed in watching without being watched, in walking where his people walked. In this world of gold lapels and glass towers, his power didn't need shine. It needed silence. He looked up once to check the boarding screen. Flight 864, Paris to Ouagadougou. On time. Row 2A. Window seat. No one looked back at him. Until they did. A few rows down, a cluster of men gathered in polished arrogance. One of them wore a navy blue blazer with gold cufflinks and a face that seemed permanently offended. Jean-Luc Delamont, CEO of a French energy conglomerate with deep colonial roots masked in corporate polish. His voice was sharp, entitled. Business class. Full, he scoffed, waving his boarding pass in the agent's face. Do you know who I am? The gate agent offered a tense smile, her fingers tapping a tablet. Yes, sir. But we're at capacity. Perhaps economy. Economy, he barked. I'm flying to finalize a €1 billion mining deal in West Africa. This is not a holiday. Behind him, his assistant stood frozen, clutching an iPad and mouthing apologies to no one in particular. Still seated by the window, Traoré didn't turn his head. He heard it all. Every word. But silence was his sword. Moments later, boarding began. Business class first. The president stood, nodded politely at the staff, and handed over his pass. Bon matin, he said softly. Morning, sir. 2A, just to your left. He moved with a calmness that made others speed up. Took his seat. Fastened his belt. No Rolex. No pin. Just presence. The whispers started almost immediately. A flight attendant, tall, sharp-featured, her hair coiled neatly in a French twist, glanced at him. Her name tag read Claire. She walked past once. Then again. Her brows pinched. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Seat 2A. Occupied. By a man in a hoodie. She whispered to her colleague, pointing discreetly. He doesn't look like business class, she said in clipped French. Check the manifest. I will. She approached slowly, rehearsing the tone. Not rude. But firm. Not insulting. But clear. Bonjour, monsieur, she began. May I see your boarding pass? Traoré glanced up. His expression unreadable. He handed her the pass without a word. Her eyes scanned it. Row 2A. Business class. Correct. But something didn't sit right. No gold card. No tie. No sign of influence. Thank you, she said, forcing a smile. We may need to adjust some seating due to operational concerns. Would you mind moving to economy? You'll be compensated. He looked at her for a moment. Not with anger. Not with surprise. Just with clarity. And why me? He asked quietly. She blinked. Oh, no reason, sir. Just a small adjustment for our guest. A guest more important than me? She hesitated. It's a senior partner. An energy executive. Very urgent matter. I see. He leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving hers. No. I'll remain in my seat. Something in her smile cracked. She nodded once, tight-lipped, and turned away briskly. Around them, no one spoke. But glances shifted. A man lowered his newspaper. A woman paused her typing. The silence changed shape. Claire entered the cockpit. A low, sharp whisper. Then she returned and walked down the aisle, not to Traoré this time, but to another black man in business class. "You, sir," she said to him. "We may need to move you." He blinked. "Why me?" She offered no answer. Just held out her hand for his boarding pass. 2 rows away, Traoré unfastened his belt and stood. "Enough." His voice wasn't raised. But it cut through the cabin like a blade. "You are making decisions based on appearance, not protocol," he said. "That is called discrimination." Claire's face flushed. "Sir, please, I'll have to ask you to sit." He met her eyes. Why is it always the quiet ones who must explain themselves? Passengers looked up. The temperature had changed. Suddenly, nothing felt like flying. Claire turned and walked off without a word. Outside the gate, Jean-Luc Delamont had just been cleared to board. Champagne already waiting. Inside seat 2A, Ibrahim Traoré buckled his belt again. And waited. Because the flight hadn't even taken off. And the landing would change everything. The cabin hummed with the mechanical stillness of pre-flight. Business class had settled, or pretended to. Some passengers tilted their screens away, others scrolled aimlessly on phones. But no one was watching movies. Not really. All eyes, even if sideways, returned again and again to the man in seat 2A. The one who didn't belong. Claire stood in the galley with arms crossed tightly, her lips barely moving as she whispered into the intercom. The captain's voice crackled back low, neutral, and slightly annoyed. "If his boarding pass is valid, we have no reason to move him." "He's being difficult," Claire insisted. "No, Claire. He's sitting in his assigned seat." Click. She exhaled hard, frustrated not by rules, but by the break in pattern. She'd done this route a dozen times. She knew the rhythm. Who belonged? Who didn't? Who to offer warm towels, and who to pass with a nod. This one didn't follow the rhythm. Meanwhile, Delamont finally boarded, flanked by his assistant and the scent of expensive cologne. He gave a theatrical sigh as he stepped into the cabin, spotting Claire instantly. "Is it done?" he asked under his breath. "We're handling it," she whispered. "Please take seat 2C. Just next to." She faltered. He looked to his left. Traoré was seated there, posture relaxed, eyes closed. Delamont chuckled. "Typical," he muttered in French, loud enough. "This is why things fall apart down there." The man in 2A didn't react. Not visibly. But his fingers tapped the armrest once. Rhythmically. Like a drum remembering its beat. Claire busied herself. Warm towels. Champagne. Adjusting Delamont's seat with eager service. He soaked it in, legs stretched, basking in assumed importance. Behind him, whispers danced quietly. "Isn't that?" "No, couldn't be." "He's too." "I think it is." Ibrahim Traoré. A woman across the aisle, a nurse returning from Marseille, leaned to her neighbor. "That's our president," she whispered. "He doesn't travel with guards." The man beside her blinked. Then why is she treating him like he's invisible? She didn't answer. Some truths answer themselves. Further down the cabin, another flight attendant passed Claire a tablet. On it, the full passenger manifest. A quiet moment passed. Claire's eyes narrowed. Ibrahim Traoré. She whispered it aloud like the name of a stranger she'd never studied in school. There was no photo. Just a name. Seat 2A. She looked up slowly. Her gaze met the man's. He said nothing. But she looked away first. The plane began taxiing. Engines low and steady, a sound like coiled patience. The captain welcomed passengers in English and French. Estimated flight time, 5 hours, 22 minutes. Delamont clicked his belt into place with theatrical annoyance. Finally, he muttered. Claire passed him a glass. Tell me, mademoiselle, he said, smirking. What's a man like that doing in business class? She didn't respond. Because she didn't know anymore. The moment the plane lifted from French soil, something shifted. The clouds outside blurred as they ascended. Inside, the temperature had changed. Not just in the air, but in mood. The man in 2A looked out the window. The wing dipped slightly. Sky and silence. Then he turned slowly. He looked at Delamont. And smiled. Not wide. Not sarcastic. Just, knowing. Delamont paused. For just a second. Claire noticed the look and quickly offered, more champagne, monsieur. Yes, he said, shaking it off. This trip will change everything for those people. Those people. The words hung there. In the space between ignorance and consequence. Traoré returned to the window. Outside, sunlight poured through like it was choosing sides. An hour passed. Then 2. The cabin dimmed. Claire made the rounds with robotic grace. But her path avoided 2A. Not by accident. She didn't know what it was, guilt? Unease? The sudden suspicion that she had stood too close to someone history would remember. Eventually, duty overruled discomfort. She approached again, fake smile intact. Would you like anything to drink, sir? He turned, eyes calm. Water, he said simply. She handed him the glass, fingers trembling just slightly. No thank you. No sorry. No recognition. He took the water, sipped once, and said nothing. Behind them, someone watched. The nurse again. She shook her head slowly. They really don't know, she murmured. Another woman nodded beside her. Soon, they will. Because some truths land heavier than planes. And this one was just starting its descent. The cabin lights flickered once, gently, like the sky was clearing its throat. Somewhere over the Mediterranean, the plane cruised steadily, slicing through clouds as if they too were unaware of the truth on board. Delamont was asleep now, reclined and snoring lightly beneath a thin blanket. A half-empty flute of champagne balanced lazily in his cup holder. Claire walked past him with practiced softness, adjusting trays, fixing pillows, resetting control panels, avoiding seat 2A every time. But the man in 2A never slept. Ibrahim Traoré sat upright, hands clasped, eyes open, watching the endless blue stretch out beyond the clouds. His mind wasn't above the sea. It was somewhere deeper, in history, in memory, in the cold corridors of power where no seat assignment mattered. He had heard every word. Every quiet insult. Every dismissive phrase. And yet, he remained still. The cabin rustled gently with murmurs and movement. People stretched. Pages turned. Ice clinked in glasses. But the mood had shifted. Whispers had turned to wondering. The nurse from earlier now sat leaning forward, her eyes on him. Her neighbor nudged her, voice low. Are you certain? She nodded. I saw him once in Bobo. He was dressed the same way. No guards. Just walking. Greeting market women like a son. A man across the aisle turned his head. Another one whispered across seats. The idea was spreading. Viral in the silence. One glance, 2 nods, 3 widened eyes. Claire noticed it, too. And for the first time in her career, she felt it, the cabin slipping out of her control. She stepped into the galley, picked up the tablet again, and rechecked the manifest. No title next to the name. No note from security. Just Ibrahim T. Seat 2A. How could it be him, she whispered. No protocol. No security. No suit. The co-pilot passed by her on the way to the lavatory and chuckled softly. "You look like you saw a ghost." Claire didn't laugh. Because somewhere inside her, pride had started to collapse under doubt. Meanwhile, Delamont stirred in his seat. He opened his eyes and glanced at the man beside him, then at the passengers now subtly watching him. Whispers again. A ripple of attention. "What is it now?" he asked. No one answered. He leaned toward Claire as she passed. "Can we move him yet? I'd like to stretch." She didn't respond. He frowned, louder now. "Claire." Traoré turned his head, slowly, deliberately. And Delamont saw it. That calm. That weight. That unnerving stillness. "Something wrong, monsieur?" Traoré asked softly. Delamont's mouth opened, but no sound came. Only the sound of his ego, tripping down a flight of unspoken realizations. Claire stepped in. "Monsieur Delamont, please remain in your seat." "For what?" he snapped. "What is this drama now?" Passengers turned toward the noise. The atmosphere compressed, thick with unsaid things. Then, the intercom chimed. The captain's voice, level and clipped, broke through. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our descent into Ouagadougou, please return to your seats and fasten your belts. We expect a smooth landing, but there will be a brief delay at disembarkation due to security protocol." Security protocol. Claire blinked. Security? What security? She stepped toward the cockpit. "Captain." He looked at her, half smiling. "Didn't you check the ground report?" She shook her head. "What ground report?" He turned the tablet around. On it was a single line. "Presidential welcome protocol, tarmac clearance in effect." Claire's mouth went dry. "No," she whispered. "No, no." But yes. Outside the window, the red earth of Burkina Faso had begun to bloom below. And with it, black SUVs. Soldiers in uniform. Military vehicles in perfect formation. Passenger heads turned, eyes wide. "Is something wrong?" someone asked. "No. It looks like." "Are those presidential guards?" Delamont peered out. He smiled arrogantly. "That's for me," he muttered to no one. "They know who's coming." He rose to adjust his jacket, smoothed his lapels, and gave Claire a wink. "They'll probably roll out the carpet." But Claire stood frozen. Because at that moment, the door to the cockpit opened. And a man in a black beret stepped into the cabin. His boots were polished. His chest bore insignia. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if counting each breath between footsteps. The cabin fell dead silent. He stopped at seat 2A. He raised his hand. And delivered a crisp military salute. "Monsieur le Président, welcome home." You could hear the air leave the cabin in one collective breath. Claire's eyes filled. Her hands trembled. Delamont blinked like he'd been slapped by history. President Ibrahim Traoré stood slowly. He didn't glare. He didn't boast. He only nodded. Another officer followed close behind and stepped toward Delamont and Claire. "You too," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "You will come with us. Now." "What?" Delamont coughed. "For what? This is absurd." "You are being detained for questioning," the officer said firmly. "For publicly disrespecting the head of state while on Burkinabe soil." Claire tried to speak. I didn't know. I was just." "You didn't need to know," the officer interrupted. "You only needed to act with respect." The plane rolled to a stop. The doors hissed open. And Truth, quiet, patient, and powerful, walked off first. The air in Ouagadougou was thick with heat, dust, and disbelief. The tarmac shimmered beneath the golden sun as if the ground itself understood the weight of what was unfolding. President Ibrahim Traoré stepped off the plane in silence. No music. No grand announcement. Just the scrape of boots, the hush of awe, and the lens clicks of a dozen cameras that hadn't been told what to expect, only that history would arrive on Flight 864. He walked past the lined soldiers, each standing like a pillar, unshaken. The ministers followed suit, bowing their heads as he passed. There was no need for words. The nation had already seen. Behind him, two shadows stumbled down the aircraft stairs under heavy escort. Claire, eyes glassy with panic. Delamont, jaw clenched, muttering legal jargon that landed like pebbles against a mountain. Each was led into separate black vehicles parked beside the presidential convoy. Not a single soldier looked at them. Not even a glance. They no longer mattered. On the other side of the airport fence, a crowd had gathered. Some had seen the live feed break out on social media. A few waved flags. Others clapped slowly, confused but emotional. Everyone was watching. Phones held high. Eyes wide. One woman whispered to her daughter, "You see? This is what real power looks like." Inside the terminal, a makeshift podium had been placed in front of a small press contingent. No speech had been scheduled. But something needed to be said. Traoré stepped to the microphone. He didn't look at his notes. He didn't look for permission. His voice was calm. Measured. The voice of someone who had waited long enough. "In Burkina Faso," he said, "we do not measure a man's worth by the polish of his shoes or the price of his seat." Reporters leaned forward. Microphones adjusted. The silence begged for each word. "We do not bow to money. We do not kneel to arrogance. And we certainly do not excuse disrespect based on skin." He let it sit there. A full breath. Let it burn where it needed to. There was a time when our ancestors were told to stand aside, to step back, to keep quiet. That time is gone. We will not return to it, not in airports, not in boardrooms, and not in the skies. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, reverent, emotional. We will build a new legacy. One where every citizen, from president to porter, walks with dignity. Where justice is not delayed until rank is recognized. Where even the nameless are treated like they matter. He stepped back. No applause. Just a stillness so complete it echoed. Behind the cameras, a woman wept quietly. The same nurse from the plane. Inside the detention office, Claire sat trembling in a chair, her hands clutching tissues she couldn't use fast enough. Across from her, a stone-faced investigator waited patiently. "I swear, I didn't know," she said for the third time. "I was just following policy." "No," he replied. "You were following prejudice. Policy doesn't ask who looks rich. You did. I didn't mean to insult anyone." "You insulted an entire country," he said. "And now you will listen." In the adjacent room, Delamont was pacing. "You can't detain me. I'm a French national. I have rights." A military officer stared at him with the blank patience of stone. "You may call your embassy," he said coldly. "But understand this, your influence stops where our soil begins." Back at the palace, Traoré had returned to work. He wasn't celebrating. He was signing papers, reviewing infrastructure proposals, approving military restructuring. But outside his office door, the world was on fire. Clips from the flight were everywhere. Passengers had uploaded footage. The salute. The arrest. The speech. It had gone viral. Hashtag Respect Africa. Hashtag I Stand with Burkina. Hashtag Traoré. Across the continent, youth gathered in coffee shops and classrooms to replay the moment the uniformed officer raised his hand in salute. Some called it the Second Independence. Even in France, journalists scrambled to defend, debate, or distance themselves from Delamont. Air France issued a public apology, bloated with legal disclaimers and empty regret. But it was too late. Traoré had not roared. He had whispered. And the world had heard it louder than thunder. The Burkinabe sun was unforgiving that week. Not hot, heavy. Like it knew it was shining on something more than just dust and concrete. The kind of weight that pressed into the hearts of a people and whispered, "Remember this." Claire sat in a detention center outside Ouagadougou. The sterile room, with its cracked fan and buzzing fluorescent light, felt like a cage wrapped in regret. Her eyes were swollen. She had cried every day since her arrival. Not because she was mistreated, but because the silence from outside was louder than screams. No statements. No protests. Not even a lawyer yet. Just silence. And time. She had replayed it all. The boarding pass. The smirk. The tone. The assumptions. It lived in her now, like a sickness without fever. Like shame with no cure. Across the courtyard, Delamont paced like a trapped lion. He shouted into phones, sent frantic emails, screamed at ambassadors and underlings. But nothing worked. Traoré had made his position clear: no special treatment. No immunity. No skipping justice. The court date was set. The charges were simple, but devastating. Public discrimination toward the head of state. Abuse of position. Attempted intimidation. Disrespect on sovereign soil. And for once in their lives, the two of them had no shield. At the courthouse, cameras crowded the steps. People gathered, not in rage, but in quiet pride. The nurse from the plane was there, holding her daughter's hand. They stood beneath the courtyard tree, watching history write itself without a single bullet or riot. Inside, the judge read the charges calmly. Delamont tried to laugh it off. Claire just cried. Traoré did not attend. He did not need to. He had already spoken. And his silence now was a crown heavier than any insult. The court ruled swiftly. Guilty. The sentences were symbolic: community restitution, fines, and a public apology to be broadcast across national media. They were spared prison. But not humiliation. The court didn't want to bury them. It wanted to teach them. When Claire's apology aired on national television, it was just her face against a gray wall. No makeup. No script. "I didn't know who he was," she said. "But I've come to understand that. I didn't need to. I only needed to treat him like a human being." Across Burkina Faso, people watched in cafes, markets, classrooms. No cheers. Just long, thoughtful silence. Then someone whispered, "That is the new Africa." At the presidential palace, Traoré watched the broadcast from a modest armchair, surrounded by reports and maps and folded newspapers. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once, and turned the TV off. Later that week, he returned to the market, the same one the nurse had seen him walking through months ago. No cameras. No speeches. Just a greeting here. A handshake there. But something had changed. Not him. Them. People looked at him differently now, not with awe, but with knowing. Like he had stepped out of myth and into memory. A man who could have shouted but chose not to. A man who could have punished, but chose to reveal. A man who understood that the most powerful voice in the world sometimes whispers. At a small pottery stall, the nurse saw him again. She approached gently. "Mr. President," she said. He turned. "Sister Nurse," he replied, smiling. "I saw you that day. I know. You didn't speak. I didn't need to." She paused, then asked, "Why didn't you announce yourself? Why let them treat you like that?" He looked at her, eyes deep and calm. "Because it was never about me," he said. "It was about who they were when they thought I was no one." Months passed. The story of the flight became legend, told in barbershops, debated in classrooms, woven into spoken word on street corners. Young boys acted it out in alleys, one playing Traoré, the other the rude CEO. And in one school near Bobo Dioulasso, a teacher ended her lesson by writing a line on the blackboard. "Dignity is not granted by a title. It is revealed by how we treat those we assume have none. She turned to the class. Who said this? A boy raised his hand. Ibrahim Traoré. She smiled. And in the back of the room, a quiet student, small, barefoot, unknown, whispered to himself. One day, they'll see me too.